Good morning, everybody. I'd love to see you chatting in the morning. It's my favorite thing. So, talking about fall and Thanksgiving, it is the favorite things of this time of year. Hello, everybody. I see some new people here. That's great. I'm afraid to touch my new computer. It has a touch screen, and when you touch it, all manner of things can happen, but it is exciting. Oh, I'm going to follow the conversation as soon as we're through with coffee talk. Can you let me know whether you can hear me and see me real well? Coming through lot strong and powerful, and my mic's on and all that. All clear. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pick up where we left off yesterday. It's first of all, I have to say, what a great day yesterday, and thank you all for being part of it, being on in the morning and at night when we were laying in bed. And I asked Joss what one of her favorite parts of her birthday was. She said one of her favorite parts was in the morning that she got greeted with all these hellos, and she said she got spammed. That's a cool new word. Spammed on coffee time with all of the happy birthdays. It's a good thing. Being spammed is a good thing. Eating spam is a good thing too. But she loved being spammed in the morning. It made her feel so special. And we ended up going out to the ceramic place and doing some painting with my mom. Hey, Penny. And we hadn't done that. I realized with my mom, we hadn't done that since like the 80s. And in those days, my mom even had a kiln in the basement and did a lot of ceramic earrings and things like that. So there was lots to talk about. And do you remember those ceramic trees that you would put the little lights in and plug in for Christmas, holiday? They make Halloween ones too. And they actually still make those at the ceramic painting place that you can buy. They cost a fortune, but you can paint them however you want. We had such a good time, such a lot of fun. I made mine for Halloween, of course, and the next one will be for Christmas, but we had such a great day. And thank you for your greetings and your friendship. And we ended up going out for pizza and then to watch Jocelyn go horseback riding. And she just started her group lesson last week because she's been missing other girls so much. Missing companionship. So I moved her from private to group. And so my mother and my sister went too yesterday. And it was the first time that she jumped. And I thought, she would be panicked, bouncing around like the ant that she is on the back of a giant horse. But she had the biggest smile on her face. And it was super joy, super, super happy day. So that was a great day. Thank you so much for being part of that. And I got to thinking, I got a little bit blasted and from sentiments. My sentiments maybe came out wrong about being free and not focusing too much on technical stuff. But I still stand by that sentiment for myself and for people I know who prefer being more creative than technical. But along those lines, I started peeking through some of my primitive books last night, and I really enjoyed it because I love primitive. I do a lot of videos and things about designing primitive. I have a class coming up designing primitive with stencils. I love primitive because I love the freedom of it. The people who are hooking with me now in a class that are doing number 8's primitive strips, the wide strips. The only problem that we are facing really is making those tight turns and circles and rosettes and things like that. And I made a video on that too, using Pez candies versus candy corn to show how you can get like little rectangular bits to form beautiful, smooth, flowing curves. But primitive hooking, I think in general, is a good place to start if you like this style. And I picked up one of my many primitive books, and it quickly became my favorite. So I want to show this to you. You probably already know this book. And I had this on the shelf, and I hadn't looked at it yet. It's called Primitive Hooked Rugs, that's the sun blasting in, by Cynthia Norwood. Now, she's got 2 primitive books. The other one is on one of the shelves, and I haven't been able to find it. But this is the one that I got to last night. And man, I love this book. And the really funny universe-speaking thing about this book is she reiterates so many of the sentiments that I was trying to articulate yesterday, but she does it so much better. So this book, just in terms of if you don't have it and if you could be interested in something like this, is a fantastic primitive book. It's less about how-to, it's less about technique. It's more about, let me show you, ideas, abstract ideas. And that sometimes is the best kind of how-to. She does an introduction. I'm going to read that to you in a minute. But the book is a lot of this kind of thing, showing you an antique primitive and how it has been reimagined by a modern hooker. And there's lots of pages of that. So when you're looking at an old design that looks hopelessly 1920s, color-wise, design-wise, and you see it reimagined with a different spin on it, that's what this book is the most about. So she says at the beginning of the book, which I think is so empowering and liberating for hookers who want to be more creative. She says, keep your mind open and don't be encumbered by rules and posted guidelines. There are no mistakes. Remember, this is primitive rug hooking. The women of our past didn't have access to all the wonderful wools we have now, nor did they have the time to dye the perfect shade if they ran out of a piece. And although the patterns were available, some commercial patterns were available in the 19th century, frequently the rug hooker simply drew her own design on a piece of burlap. If she ran out of one fabric, she picked up another, and she finished what she was working on in a totally different color. And that can sometimes make it difficult when you're looking at hooked rugs, and we're going to look at some of my really old ones in a minute. It sometimes makes it difficult to your eye without science to know whether when you get a crazy color change in an old rug, whether that is the material, the dye in the material fading, or whether it was the person hooking who ran out of the trouser fabric and switched to the, ripped up blanket. Sometimes that's hard to know, but the tone of this book and the sentiments in this book are amazing. She says also, what would happen if you gave line drawings of old rugs to all of your friends who hooked, but you didn't allow them to see the original hooked rug, what they were drawing it off of? So in other words, you show them this, and they all make something, and the authors came out like this. Now, that would be such a cool exercise. I'm sure people have done this before, but it would just prove the point that what you're imagining, looking at the same thing, you're imagining an end product that is completely different. And that is the creative part of rug hooking. That is not the technical part. You're going to be thinking in terms of color placement, your favorite colors, things that you might want to add, things that you might want to alter, and that will be all yours. I can't recommend this book highly enough. This is another example of an old rug. Who hasn't seen like A Basket of Flowers, classic, but then the two on the bottom are new ones. Good Sheila. Sheila's saying that she's so happy to have been mentored by Nancy Busey, who taught her to be relaxed and to be free and to be unafraid. One of the other comments in this book that was really good was like, it was under tips. And I thought it was really pointed that it was under tips, because one of her tips said, if you have a teacher who's telling you there is one way to do something, you need to find another teacher. Now, that is comical in itself that it's under the tips, because she's not telling you about ripping versus cutting or color placement or shading. She's telling you, if somebody is telling you something that sounds so tunnel vision, narrow and limited, then that's the first thing that you need to change. And then you worry about your techniques and building your little sort of repertoire of skills. So again, I'm going to show you a little bit, and then I'll show you more of this book, but this is the old one here, which is a gorgeous, really reminiscent of Magdalena Ebby Briner. I cannot find my book by her. I mentioned it the other day. This is the new one. I wish I could, because I really want to share that with you, but I can't. So I'm going to show you this instead. This is what reminded me of her. And I have searched the house high and low. It's beyond crazy. But I picked this up on eBay a while back. It's very similar to her style, if you know her style. And if you see all the circular motifs around the edges, how they're each different, another signature thing that relates to rug hooking. So, I mean, to primitive rug hooking specifically. So this is really quite rough in design, but you can also see how effective it is. It's also very well done for something that is hooked this large. This is the back. That's how well done this is. Now, primitive hooking is often done beyond an 8. That's something that's sometimes hard to imagine, especially for beginners. You're not probably getting the scope of how wide those are, but those are much wider than an 8. And when you think about it, people who were the original primitive hookers were using scraps, were using a bent nail or something that a man improvised from a work shed, were using ripped up blankets, old baby clothes, things that were, hopelessly damaged, were not dyeing, did not have a lot of choices. and did certainly not have a cutter. So they would be cutting with the tear method, with just ripping strips method. And if you want to be truly primitive, that's something that you can think about, just putting a little notch in it with your scissors to sort of facilitate it, and then just ripping your strips quite wide. You can hook quite wide, but you want to be careful to be hooking on something that's very loose. I personally, when I hook wider than an 8, will go back to burlap. And I know that's like a swear word in our hooking community, but I will, because I feel like it's so pliable. And of course, that's what these people were using after homespun. People, hooking in the early hooking days, which the origin of which is always going to be an argument until something definitive, really definitive comes out, which it might, because some people will argue that this is a Swedish thing in origin, hooking, or even an Egyptian thing in hooking. But most people will agree that it's a North American thing that happened at the very beginning of the 19th century in northern New England / like Nova Scotia, Labrador area. So having said that, those people obviously at that time were not using cutters, and they were just ripping as they went. So I want to show you, I've got a lot going on here. Don't let me knock down the microphone. Say a little prayer. When I had that horse thing, it's not finished and the pieces didn't come with it. So I ended up pulling out a bunch of really drab colored material that I had that I didn't like at all. And I over dyed it and ripped it into really wide strips. Now I might bring them down from this, but these are like all scrappy scraps. And, I dyed them all different colors. I did a few different pots. I did a little bit of color marrying. I know there's light coming in from the kids' room. I did a little bit of color marrying so that colors crossed and there would be some sameness. I'm not sure it's going to work with those colors on this rug, but I thought I'm just going to give it a shot to see. I wanted to brighten up the border a little bit, and I might take some out, move some of the existing color around, and put some of mine back in. But we'll see how it goes. There are so many options when you are hooking primitive. Now, I also have, if you can see this one back here, this is not in super great shape. This is another early rug. Now, of course, the fundamental question that comes up is, what is primitive? And maybe I should have started there, because your definition might be different than my definition. And honestly, it's a moving target, like so many things, because when you think primitive literally means like untrained. So that isn't the definition with rug hooking. Your idea of primitive might be based more around the colors that someone uses, like the classic muted colors, or maybe your idea of primitive is more like the kind of design, a very simple design, the sort of twofold design, traditional rug hooking design. That's also a moving target, because then we get into the 20th century and we confuse 20th century designs with more primitive designs. But remember, when I started a minute ago, the first people who hooked were drawing their own designs onto backing. And before burlap was manufactured, this is like a 19th century invention, burlap, before that was manufactured, people had to use homespun, which was fairly tight in weave, depending on how it was done. And that would have been hard to work with, but it was what they had. So that was the option. So looking at something that we would call primitive, this is a primitive design. I don't want to touch it too much because it has some giant holes in it, but let me move it a little bit to show you. It's got a giant hole in the middle. I'm not going to do it. I'm too scared. There's a giant hole right here, but it's this on both sides, and it's beautifully done. The colors are a little bit faded, not super faded, but it's just a gorgeous, simple design. Primitive to a lot of people also means it should have elements that are not symmetrical, right? It should be imperfect. That's where freedom comes in with this form of hooking. It should be imperfect. So this is certainly imperfect. You're not getting it exactly the same from side to side, color-wise, motif-wise, design-wise, or anything. Then there are some other ones I have that are also oldies. This is a smaller one. And this is more what I would think of like a late Victorian, early 20th century motif. Anything with scrolls, of course, is going to make you think of Pearl McGown. I think this is a newer one, actually. It's had some wear and tear, but it's a primitive style with the roses having been popped with a little more color and detail. So if primitive means literally untrained, of course, even back in the day, the first days of hooking, when this became a thing, a visible thing from woman to woman, household to household, there are going to be people who are better at it than the next person. So when you're drawing your own design out, yours might be better than your neighbor's, or your neighbor's might be better, and you might copy some elements of their design, to try to make yours a little bit better, something to be a little more proud of. Anything that you worked on for this long, even though it was a utilitarian item, it was an object of prestige, and it was something that you would be proud of. So you would want it to be the best you could. If you were already an artist who was fantastic, you had that inside of you to begin with, natural ability, then your rug would be hard to describe as primitive, because it would probably be amazing. And I have some examples of that in this book as well. Other people did not have the time to be amazing. They did not have the means. Ripping, large pieces and not having a lot of fineness to start with, bad start. Not having a lot of colors or clothing or textures to start with, not a good variety, bad start. And not having that natural ability, you're going to go towards simple things, and your rug is going to look primitive. So there are so many shades of primitive, even within early hookers, because you do get people who are stars at what they do because of natural ability. And when you think about what people had to do in the 19th century day to day, the amount of work, the amount of light that they would get before it was all over and time for bed was so limited. It's miraculous that anything came out of that time period. This is another nice older one. Am I showing it good there? A nice sort of scroll design, very simple, very dark in the middle, some nice color variation. I'm showing you the front because the back is also gorgeous. The back is still really colorful. These are a bunch of rugs that I'd like to work on one of these whimsical days when I have a bit more time. It is possible to repair rugs with this kind of damage. This is just a little itty bitty one, and this is not even wool. This is mostly cotton. The burlap has definitely had it. But what a cute little scene, right? Don't worry, it's not a silk stocking mat. No way. It's probably cotton. It could be a little bit of rayon, that kind of thing. But really cute. So imperfect is one of our keywords. I want to get my stuff back to show you here. And let me hark back to the book for a minute, because I just can't get over the ideas in this book being so positive and inspirational. So like I was just saying, with so many of these early hookers who were not fantastic, you were able to get, starting with Edward Sands, commercial patterns that were already drawn or stencils to get started with. So often you could obtain a pattern on backing, burlap, that had just the border. And this was a very common thing. So that last rug I showed you, there was nothing in the middle. It was just the border. That happened a lot. And if that happened to you and you thought that was a boring composition, you might try to design something for the border. And she shows us in this book an example of this very thing. This is a rug where the border is really, really well done. So obviously there's some information on that pattern about scrolling that border. But then look at the design in the middle. It's a fern and it's beautiful, but it's completely off center. And it's almost a certainty that the person drew that. And, when they started drawing it, it was a little bit off and they didn't know, and they weren't an expert. And it turns out to be a tremendous piece of American folk art. What makes it perfect? The imperfection. Papa's over there, sweetie. But there's all kinds of little things in this book. Okay, there she is. There's the lady. Don't get crazy, honey. Now, this is my favorite piece in the book. This piece is available from the Woolly Fox. It was hooked by Crystal Brown in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to show you this. It was based on an antique coverlet. I think this pattern is still available. You see this brown one here? It's a lion with a blue face. And it says, note how imperfect the fence posts are, right? They are completely imperfect, but it's what makes this so interesting. It's also a good example of when you're hooking primitive, you don't have to go crazy with color. You have to be conscious of having some darks, having some lights, having a balance between them. But you can see how successful you can be with brown, white, and just a blue face. There's so many examples like that in this book. This book is just over the top. I want to show you a couple more things, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. Another thing that this book discusses that is hardly ever discussed are borders on primitive rugs. So whether you've got a scroll or whatever, you usually have definition, a border definition of some sort in a primitive rug design. And that border line is either called the beauty line or the break line. And that's discussed in this book because in primitive rug hooking, the border is a huge motif. The central part can be blank, but the border is a huge motif. And you have so many choices about what you would like to do with filling that border. And this book is amazing. Somebody's phone is going crazy. Okay, sorry. This book is amazing at helping you think that out. Now, here we go. There's a few pages devoted to, sorry, we've got 2 kids homeschooling here. So there's like all kinds of crazy noise. This chapter or part of this chapter is devoted to a subject that people write about and ask about a lot, hooking with antique paisley. Now there is a pile of delicious, crazy, beautiful antique paisley. And if you look at this bird, you will see the author's example. Look at the neck of the bird and the wing. Using paisley, the reason why people use paisley, because most people will say, why bother? It's so thin, it's fragile, it's a nightmare, it frays. Why would anybody take this on? Because the effect that you can get with it is completely unique. And nothing else will do that other than a paisley. So using paisleys, of course, if you get a hold of an antique textile, this is like the costume person in me, be really careful that it's not worth something because this is the era of the India shawl, right? The 19th century, Jane Austen, right? The shawl was most women's number one and only luxury item, if nothing else, a beautiful shawl. So even if it has holes in it, it might not be something you want to cut up. It might still be valuable, have historical value. If it's yours, it's up to you, of course. If it's a family thing, it's up to you. But hooking with paisley is a thing. And there are a lot of tips to hooking with paisley. You would never want to hook narrow with paisley because it wants to fray. It's also fairly transparent. So, and it has a right side and a wrong side. So you always want to be, Josh, shut the door to the bathroom, please. This is a really strong microphone. Sorry about that. It's a nut house. So you want to be using the right side when you pull your loops up. If you have paisley and you're happy with using it, or you're struggling with using it and persevering, you might want to think of putting a second fabric behind it to give it more body, just to puff it up a bit, because it'll probably be worth your while to push through and see the effects you get. For other people, it's just maybe not your thing. But if you have access to paisley, you might want to give it a try. I don't have anything antique paisley that I would cut up. But when I lived in the Netherlands for so long, and I was born there too, but I grew up mostly when I was young in the U.S., so I was out of touch with that culture. But paisley is still a huge thing in the Netherlands, and it's a big motif in their clothing still. And there's a store there called O'Lilly, and that's spelled, if you want to check it out, Oililly. And they make paisley that is a mix of like cotton and like wool challis. And their scarves are beautiful, and I'm going to show you a bunch of them. I don't want you to be jealous because your heart is going to sink and you're going to get stomach cramps, I think, when you see them because they're just too good. But this is, I quilted with some of them a while ago when I could be bothered to quilt. And this is like charm quilts of a bunch of the different paisleys that this store makes as scarves. So I have a bunch of these. I had this on eBay for a while, and I had a bunch of them actually. I might have a few left. I was selling them at craft fairs, and of course there's no craft fairs right now, but I'm going to show you the pile of these scarves. And I have yet to try hooking with them. I told you, right? These are just like over the top. They're all women's scarves. And again, they're like a blend. They are not pure wool, and they do fray. I know that from quilting with them. But with some of the quilting, I used some small pieces and I put like interfacing behind them, and that worked really well. So I am going to attempt to do some hooking with these. And obviously I have quite a few. Thanks, Chris. I'll see how it goes and I'll let you know. Each one is quite big. But the thing about these paisleys, and again, if you go on eBay, eBay is international, of course. And Dutch eBay, there are people selling these. They're not cheap. But when I lived over there, I was getting them at the flea markets and stuff in Amsterdam, and they were still not cheap. They sold for about 30 euro each, but in flea markets they sold for like between 5 and 10. So they're really beautiful. And I'm so curious to see how they hook, because this could be, oh gosh, it's getting so late. I know, right, Joelle? It's like crazy times. There's tons. They would put out like 10, 15 different color combos, always paisley, every year. So that's something to think about. I'll follow up with that because you might be interested in hooking with paisley, and this might be a good shortcut. And if I can make some of this available to you, I promise you I will. Of course, other things that you could hook primitive with, plaids. And in this book, Cynthia calls them magic fibers. Understandably, because look at the variation she's getting. Doesn't this remind you of the Hutchinson marble cake? I'm never going to be able to stop talking about the Hutchinson marble cake background. But look at the effects that you're getting from plaid fabrics. It's doing a lot of the work for you. So I get a lot of my plaid fabrics like at Heavens to Betsy, their online store. I got a lot this year on Cape Cod at the White Cat. This is the White Cat brand. But hooking with stuff like this, and you can even over dye it. This is an example of over dyeing plaid. You know, Cynthia is making the perfect point that when you are hooking with plaid, it's doing a lot of the work for you. It's doing a lot of the magic for you. And of course, I do a lot of primitive hooking with stuff I dye too, because that, again, is doing a lot of the work for you. God, how did it get so late? I was nowhere near done. We might have to revisit this. I had about 100 more things I wanted to show you. Let me just make sure there's nothing else that we're going to. Another really nice monochromatic, very limited color, but look at how effective that is. That is a pattern designed by Karen Kahle, Kahle. And I just want to show you, we're going to have to come back to this at some point, right? Because it's too good of a subject and it's too big of a subject. I just want to show you some of the primitive rugs that my friend Karen Quigley sent, because I think she is the primitive master. Oh, I just love these so much. I mean, how pretty is this? Again, one of the things you might think of when you define country rugs by Pat Hornafius is, I know I'm not saying that right, is wonderful examples of borders. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Country rugs. Make sure you're checking the thing and I'll put it in the comments later. But yeah, I had to get a bunch of primitive style rugs from Karen because I'm just starting with primitive and she's been doing it. And obviously she's been killing it doing it. And the backs look like needlepoint. They're so perfect. But yeah, I'm getting into it. And the freedom with hooking in this style, right, is like unending. Color, design, pattern, marble cake. I just have to show you these. I'm working on something primitive now too. I'm going to leave that one in there. We're going to save that for Halloween. I'm working on this. This is one of my designs, the spooky head vase that I took out for Halloween. But Joss, I'm doing a call. You better shut the door in case people can see you. We don't need bathroom shenanigans. I'd have to delete the video. Oh my God. Spooky head vase. And it's one of the ones I do that is like same side to side. But I'm doing this one with yarn. And, you know, it's a different experience hooking primitive with yarn. But I still use the color changing as if it were plaid wool or, you know, something that I dyed like casserole dish dyeing. I dyed these too. This is my antique black. And then this multicolor one here is the one I'm using in the background here. And it's still going to give you a great effect. If you are a person who prefers hooking with yarn and you still love primitive, hook primitive with yarn. This isn't even that bulky. This is like minor bulky, between bulky and worsted. Could be a lot bulkier, but it gives you a nice little bead effect and a lot of color variation. And I really think that this is a subject we need to revisit. But let me just show you one more thing along these lines. I was also looking at some of the Pearl McGown newsletters in bed last night. And as much as the Pearl McGown and shading, as I was saying yesterday, is the opposite of primitive, there is a crossover because I found it in this article. This is the volume 48, issue number 3. And we're looking at this rug, which is super finely shaded. And that is not primitive. But if you look closely at the background, check this out. The background is hooked like a primitive rug rather than like a more traditional style rug. Do you see this? How they've hooked in like silhouettes and leaves in the background. That's more of a primitive thing. So there can be crossover. It's always nice when you cross over. If you're crossing styles, If you're crossing sizes of wool, thick ones and thin ones, mixes of sizes. If you're crossing some wool, some yarn, strips, yarn, whenever you do crossover, it creates so much more interest and opens up a whole new world, a whole new look, limitless possibilities. So I ran out of time with primitives. I have so much more to do with primitives, but we'll do this again another time. We'll see how it goes. Thank you so much. Let me make sure there's no pressing questions here. Have a great day too. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're reading the comments as you go. I can't always read during because I'm thinking. I hope it was a fun one. I'm getting so into primitive now. Maybe it's just a winter thing, but I see more ideas coming. And let me know what you're all working on too. Tomorrow's already Friday, so it will be our last coffee time of the week. Next week, we're going to start doing, Jess, you want to say bye? You want to weasel in? Next week, we're going to start doing coffee time 4 days a week, Monday to Thursday, not tomorrow, next week. And on Friday, we're going to do cocktail time instead of coffee time, more toward the evening. So that people, get away from the microphone, so that people who are working can also enjoy and log on and interact. So, and also in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to introduce another thing that's called, probably going to call it Zoom, SOS Zoom or Zoom SOS, where there will be 1 day a week where I have an open Zoom call and I put the number out there and people can log on and just chat or ask questions. We're going to do that once a week too, so we can talk to each other more directly. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of Coffee Time, talking primitive. Oh, I hope that didn't happen to you. I touched my screen. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Be busy, be happy, be free. No rules.